Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio on July 6, 2016. This is Andrew Fisher, your host, broadcasting normally Wednesdays from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to expose the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it isn't. On the show today, I had someone who was, I didn't know about him. I received an email one day from someone who I'm not sure who it was. I believe maybe it was his publicist or something, recommending that Joshua M. Greene come on my show as a guest. He is the he's the author of a book called Swami in a Strange Land, How Krishna Came to the West, and titled this video, How Swami Brought Krishna Teachings and Legacy to America, titled this interview. I'll be giving Joshua the chance to introduce himself, give a little bit of a life story, and also give an abridged plot of the storyline of the book, and also talk about how it influenced people like Beatles' George Harrison, and lots of other things going on here that are like a Holocaust and justice at Dachau, things like that. We'll find a way to make this a worthwhile 2-hour interview, and I'll get to know Joshua Greene a little better. If this is him in the queue here, area code 516, if that is you, Joshua, I will get you on in about 8.5 minutes at 10 after the hour, 16 Eastern, no later than that. I'll try to. Every time I say that, it seems like I go a minute or two over when I do the news, but I don't think I'll have to do too much news because there's only one story that seems to be all the rage now that's pissing everyone off right now. And just give me a second here to get to InfoWars, the news, as always, courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. Give me a second here to re-upload the page to make sure the most up-to-date news stories are up. But like I said, there is only one news story that seems to be all the rage now. That's pissing everybody off, making everybody angry, making everybody think, how in the world can this happen? Does this mean I don't have to obey the law too? Yes, I am talking about how Satanist scumbag bitch Hillary Clinton, she is an Illuminati grand dame, as Fritz Springmeier exposed in his book Bloodlines of the Illuminati. And, of course, every time I talk about Hillary Clinton, you know I can't help but mention how in David Icke's 1998 documentary, Revelations of a Mother Goddess, Arizona Wilder, who was a mind control slave of the Illuminati, she had the privilege to, I say privilege, it's not really a privilege, it's kind of frightening, but I guess maybe in her case, one might say it's a privilege, to be a energy source, a mother goddess energy source at satanic Illuminati rituals where she had the chance to see many political and corporate leaders shapeshift from human into reptilian form, and vice versa, from human to reptilian aliens and back. And in Revelations of Mother Goddess documentary, Arizona Wilder did say, quote, I saw Hillary Clinton before I knew she was Hillary Clinton. You know I say that every time I mention Hillary Clinton. I can't get enough of it. It's never going to get old. And this is making everybody angry. I mean, hashtag handcuff Hillary was the latest craze. And like InfoWars was selling these Hillary for Prison 2016 T-shirts, several different versions of those shirts actually, and they were being sold out nonstop, and it didn't really matter because the FBI said that they are not going to press charges against Hillary for the whole email scandal, and not only that, the whole Benghazi thing. She was in on the conspiracy to murder the Benghazi ambassador so he wouldn't be able to stop the weapons transfer to Al-Qaeda on the 11th anniversary of September 11th, on September 11th, 2012, I believe was when that happened, and it's being all the rage now. And well, first of all, I'll get to a couple news stories there. There's a few news stories that pertain to that, but first news story, some video here. It says state police don't want reporters on the border. Texas state troopers void First Amendment near border. InfoWars reporters documenting the ongoing illegal immigration crisis on the South Texas border were chased off by Texas State Police Wednesday after U.S. Border Patrol agents approved the operation. Yes, we all know that there is a conspiracy to bring illegal immigrants from Mexico and also refugees from the Middle East into America, Canada, Europe, and also Australia. I listened to a George Kavassilis interview recently, and he said, yes, there is down in Australia, they're also bringing illegal immigrants into the country. And you're going to use those illegal immigrants to take our jobs, crash the economy, screw us over, divide and conquer between people of different races, and make Islam and Christianity and all the religions clash, and all that's the plot. Now, we need to learn to get along with everybody, and I've always debated this on my show, whether immigration, international immigration specifically, should be a privilege or a right. Most people would say that immigration at the international level is a privilege. It's not a right, and the reason it's a privilege is because the people of a nation have the right to ask their government to secure the border and do a vetting process or anyone or anything that attempts to cross the border. But some would assert that people having that right to vet and vet people across the border and secure the border violates immigrants' right to travel. Now, it's kind of debatable on that issue. I mean, can we someday see the day where people can cross international borders without government permission or paperwork filing in the same way that people in America can do so crossing interstate borders, and also in Canada and China crossing provincial borders, and in Australia crossing the borders of territories within Australia without having to get any government permission from Australia's or Canada's or China's national government or the local governments in those provinces, territories, and states? And can we maybe sail into public waterways without having to go through an Ellis Island type procedure to be able to immigrate into the country? Is that ever going to be possible? Well, many would say that's not a good idea, because if you don't vet immigrants at the international level, society would collapse. Well, I don't know. It's a debatable issue. We'll have a debate on it all the time, but as long as there is this conspiracy to use illegal immigrants to destroy our way of life, our civilization, our society, then I think it would be in our best interest to treat immigration as a privilege and not a right, and vet those immigrants. Next article, enough of the immigration stuff now. Donald Trump says on November 8th, Hillary will pay for her sins. The voters are going to end her lying. Presumptive Democrat nominee Hillary Clinton is guilty as hell, that's a quote, guilty as hell, and is set for judgment by American voters come November 8th, GOP candidate Donald Trump declared Wednesday. Now, I've heard from some people in the spirituality community that Donald Trump really doesn't want to be president, and he's going to drop out of the race because he doesn't really want to be in, like, a White House. He'd rather be a hotel tycoon because he's got a big ego and all. I mean, I think he's being honest and all, caring about people and for liberty and everything, and maybe some of the things he's like saying, like, don't let immigrants into this country, spy on Muslims and everything like that. He's maybe saying that to try to go along with the globalists so they maybe don't want to screw him over to not let him be president. But I've also heard rumors that maybe Trump has some Freemason connections because his daughter has been seen flashing Freemason signs during Trump's speeches and such. Alfred Weber was talking about that. But how could Hillary beat Trump unless there's voter fraud? Who knows? I don't know. How can it not be obvious if that happens? Next article, video. Why were other people charged for the same thing Hillary got away with? The law doesn't apply if her last name is Clinton. Paul Joseph Watson, InfoWars reporter, exposed why Hillary is above the law when numerous other people were charged for the very same thing, mishandling classified information. Well, she's an Illuminati grand dame, and I have a very bad feeling that she and her adulterous husband told people in the FBI and all their minions in Washington, D.C., which the Clintons run to a great extent, now listen up, we're going to murder you and your wife and kids if you don't acquit Hillary of all these crimes. Is that understood? And everybody went along to get along and bowed down to Hillary, and so they gave in, and because they were cowards. Can't give in to fear like that, folks. It's ridiculous. All right, next article. Trump ad features Comey exposing Hillary's lies. FBI findings spliced with Hillary's lies regarding email servers. A new Donald Trump ad features FBI Director James Comey rebutting the lies Hillary Clinton made about her private email servers. I mentioned this enough. Don't need to talk about it anymore. Next article. Queen Hillary's attack plan. What is the next move for Clinton after being left off by the FBI? Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson talk all about that. You guys can check that interview on your own. Next article, Roger Stone says, nothing can save Hillary Clinton in the debate with Donald Trump. She got off easy with the FBI, but won't be as lucky during a national debate. Roger Stone tells Alex Jones just how badly Donald Trump would demolish Hillary Clinton in a presidential debate. Well, I'm sure he would, but hopefully the public won't be so brainwashed, and all those leftists who think Donald Trump is a racist when he's not won't be brainwashed into supporting Hillary. You got to wake up a lot of those people, those leftist groups like Black Lives Matter and Democracy for America and all those groups that are very socialist to a great extent, that support Bernie and hate Donald Trump because they've been brainwashed and think he's racist. There's a lot of globalist operators in those groups, but then again, there's a lot of good people who have just been brainwashed, so we got to wake those groups up. I was at a Patriot Rally protest, and there was a leftist Black Lives Matter group counter-protesting us, and I could tell there were some people that were just flat-out brainwashed and were not operatives. Definitely got to wake people up there. All right, last article. DNC caught paying for leftist protesters at RNC. Once again, Democrats resort to monetary compensation in exchange for disrupting events. Hacker Lucifer has released a 22-page document over the DNC spreading $800,000 spending $800,000 to sabotage the RNC. Yes, they are paying for leftist protesters to sabotage everything. It's absolutely sad and pathetic and all. Well, that's enough of that. Enough of the disturbing news. I hope you all have a bad taste in your mouth about Hillary. We can't let her get off easy. If you got $20 to spare, buy a Hillary for Prison t-shirt at InfoWars. So without further ado, area code 516, is this Joshua M. Greene?
Yes, it is.
How you doing? Glad to have you on. I'm very glad. I was recommended to have you as a guest on my show. You seem like a very, very interesting guy. Your book, Swami in a Strange Land, I haven't read it. Maybe someday I will. Haven't checked to see if my public library has it. If they do, I'll definitely put it up for consideration as a book to get. But who was that, by the way, who recommended you? Was that your publicist or was that someone else?
Yeah, I believe this is someone who has provided you with other guests in years gone by, including an old friend of mine who wrote a book called Forbidden Archaeology.
Oh, Michael Cremo. Yes,
yeah.
That was a great interview. I probably shouldn't have spent so much time talking about ancient aliens on that show. That's where I got a lot of my sources, a lot of information from Michael. Never had a chance to read his book, Forbidden Archaeology. It's at the public library, I know. It's like a 900-some page book, though, so it's a book I have to renew several times, and even after renewing it several times, I'll probably have to wait again because you can only renew a book 3 times at the libraries I'm here. But someday I can guarantee Michael Cremo I'll read that book, and that was a great interview. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people say it's questionable because, like Cremo says, it's just stuff he believes because it's the Hindu Vedic text and all, and a lot of it has to do with belief. But I have no doubt that regardless of whether or not that's religion, there is truth to those things. You can say what you want about how religions were put on this world by the powers that be to brainwash and suppress consciousness. That does not change the fact that a lot of the things you see in religious texts can certainly be based on true real-life events. They've just been twisted and all. But I'm digressing. I've babbled long enough. I'd like to give you the chance, since you probably don't have much of a household name like many of my other guests have, like Michael Cremo does perhaps. I'd like to give you the chance to change that so people who listen to this can become more familiar with you, more familiar with your work. So give us your life story, I guess, to some degree, pertaining to your work, and then give an abridged version of the plot of the book, Swami in a Strange Land, How Krishna Came to the West. You got the floor.
So 66 years and 66 seconds, huh? Well, thanks for the invitation.
We got 2 hours, so I got to find a way to fill it up. So you got go ahead.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your show, even though we don't know each other. Perhaps the point that brings us closest together is a shared sense that the reality we see and the reality we are told about and the reality that we read about isn't the whole story. There's more going on than meets the eye. And when I was a young man, that truth was driven home to me when I visited London in 1969 on a Christmas holiday break from school. I was at the Sorbonne in Paris studying journalism and literature. And when I got to London, I visited the Krishna temple, which is not a place I would normally have visited. I mean, my parents were not particularly believing people. I don't consider myself a religious man. Spiritual maybe, but not religious. But I was curious, and when I got there were some lovely young people, and they were asking me about myself, and I told them, well, I'm studying this and doing that, and I play organ in a band. Really, that got their attention. They said, come with us. So we piled into a Volkswagen minibus. Andrew, are you old enough to even remember the Volkswagen minibus? It was probably the most dangerous,
old, so
probably the most dangerous car ever allowed on the roads. So we're jostling back and forth on our way someplace, and I said, so where are we going? And I say, well, you'll see, but congratulations, you're in Krishna's band now. So we show up about 15 minutes later, and it's 3 Savile Row. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember the Beatles, 3 Savile Row back in those days was Beatles headquarters. So as a 19-year-old, to be staring at the door behind which the Beatles live was kind of like being given a free pass to heaven. We walk in studio, and sure enough, there's George Harrison standing there, skinny as a string bean, hair down to his waist. And he greets some of his friends and hugs them, and they point to me and say something to him. And he walks over and hands me a harmonium, which is a hand-pumped keyboard instrument from India. And he says, well, just play along. So they started recording an Indian devotional song, and I picked up the melody and started playing. And I'm saying to myself, okay, let me get this straight. If I stay with these people, I get God and the Beatles. Okay, let me think about it. Okay, I'm in. So I ended up staying in ashram life for about 13 years and learned enough Sanskrit to recite some verses and came back to the States. I was 32. So whatever happened in the 1970s, I have no idea. I lost a whole decade. Went back to school, finished my college degrees, and started teaching. And here we are. So that's 66 years and maybe a little more than 66 seconds. The book that brings us together, Swami in a Strange Land, is a thank you to my teacher, Bhakivedanta Swami. He was known to students as Prabhupada, and George Harrison and I studied yoga with Prabhupada. So this is Prabhupada's life story, and it gives the essence of his teachings.
Thank you. And I had a Swami as a guest on my show back in the day, Swami Vivekananda Giri, if I pronounced that correctly. And one of the first things I asked him when he was a guest on my show is, are you Hindu or are you not Hindu? If you're Hindu, people would say, well, you take up a religion, that means you're brainwashed, and say what you want about First Amendment freedom of religion and all. I mean, one would find that, especially people who are like you, spiritual but not religious, would find that questionable. But he said, no, please don't confuse this. I am not a Hindu. On the face of it, I may seem like one, but I am not. So people can listen to my interview with him to become acquainted with how that's the idea. But just to elaborate on that spiritual but not religious thing, we got a lot of issues going on here in America with especially Christians who will not allow, like people that are spiritual but not religious, they do not follow Christian beliefs. But a lot of constitutionalists here in America that are freedom fighters, they have strong Christian beliefs. And just because those spiritual but not religious people do not follow Christianity, they're going to get kicked out of patriot groups and such. I myself suffered a fate like that with a group who, just out of respect for them, even though I have a bad taste in my mouth, I'll keep quiet about what group that was, but they did kick me out because I was spiritual but not religious, and also because I was willing to talk about ET cover-ups, and they thought that patriot community groups shouldn't really be talking about that because it's not down to earth and all. So I know what it's like, but being spiritual but not religious, and also clarify, how can you be a Swami but not be Hindu?
All right, good questions. One of the most important things I learned from Prabhupada, and I talk about this in the book, Swami in a Strange Land, was if there's ever going to be any hope for peace in the world, if there's ever going to be any hope for a reconciliation between peoples, it's probably going to be because people who hold very strong convictions will begin to acknowledge that while they may have their covenant with God, other people have the right to their covenant with God as well, even if they don't follow the same scriptures or the same rituals. And the most impressive people I've ever met in my life, starting with Prabhupada, had the ability to step outside their own certitude, their own sense of having truth, far enough to listen to other people with your ears wide open. And I can tell you, Andrew, from many years of experience here, sure, and all the philosophy you want, you're not going to change anybody. What changes people is refined character, purity of purpose, an open heart, and compassion. And I know for a fact when I first went into the Krishna temple in London back in 1969, I didn't know anything about Sanskrit. I didn't know anything about the Bhagavad Gita, which is kind of called the Bible of the East. What I recognized very quickly was that these are really good people. And this is the kind of, in Christianity, it would be called fellowship. In Sanskrit, it would be called Sangha. This is the kind of company that I want in my life. I want to surround myself with people who are good examples, who lead a clean life, a healthy life, who have the best of intentions. That changes hearts. Now, can I tell you a little story? I was invited to talk about the book, Swami in a Strange Land, down at a public gathering here in New York about 3 weeks ago. And very quickly the crowd grew, and it was clear in a very short time that these were more or less all very conservative Christians. And it turned out that day, many church groups, Texas and elsewhere, had sent busloads of congregants to New York. A lot of them were high school kids. And I was there to talk about these ancient teachings from India. So one young man stood up with a big Bible. There are many editions of the Bible. He had a big one in his hand. And he said, I see the people you're with here, these Krishna people, worshiping idols. And he pointed to a picture of Krishna that we had there. And he said, do you know it says here in the Bible that thou shalt not worship idols? Why are you worshiping idols? And I said, well, that's an interesting point of view. It's a good question. I was raised Jewish. In the holy days, when you go to a synagogue and their services are there, at a certain point in the prayers, people genuflect and bow to the altar. They're bowing to the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And I'll bet anything, young man, that when you go to church, Christ is there on the cross, and you pay respects to him. Are you an idol worshiper? Maybe there's another way to look at this that has a deeper meaning than just what our eyes can see. So at that point, he was fumphing around a little bit, so he flipped the page and went to another verse, and he says, what about right here where it says, Christ says, I am the light and the truth and the way, and no one comes to the Father but through me. Have you accepted Jesus in your heart? I looked at him with surprise. I said, what thinking, feeling, caring person would not accept Jesus into his heart? How can anyone reject someone who gave his life so that we can be saved from the illusion of this material world? Of course I've accepted him in my heart. But what does it mean to accept Jesus? Does it mean that we just sit here spouting verses at each other? Or does it mean a change of character? Does it mean that somehow we live our lives in the world in a better way? And if that's the case, then maybe we have to make room for the fact that other people who live their lives in the world in a better way too have a place just like we do. I don't remember anywhere Jesus saying, you know what, the people who follow me, those are real people. Everyone else can go to hell. I don't remember Jesus saying, I remember Jesus saying, suffer the poor to come unto me. I remember Jesus. What about Jesus' example of compassion and love for everyone? Where is that Christian charity? Well, again, he was fumphing. And at this point, a woman behind him stepped forward and said, I'm his mother. Oh, okay. Then it became a little bit clear to me that here was a young man more or less trying to show his mother that he was being a good Christian, that he'd learned his lessons in church. And so I said, you must be very proud of your son. He's obviously very committed to his faith. But they didn't want to talk about it, and they walked away.
Thank you very much. Just so you know, I'm going to be on mute every time you're talking, so if there's a delay, that's only because the mute button might be taking a little long to unmute. But since we're talking about Krishna and all that stuff, the Hare Krishna mantra, you know what that is, where you say Hare Krishna, 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 Hare, Hare. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, that's part of my meditational practice.
Yes. I say that myself, and maybe you can help me explain how it works. Well, I understand how it works, but just for those that don't know, well, I first heard about this listening to a radio show with Santos Bonacci as a guest. Now, I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes when I mention Santos Bonacci as a source, because a lot of people think ever since he got out of jail, that guy's totally lost his marbles, because among other things, he subscribes to the ridiculous idea that is the flat earth theory. But, all right, that's besides the issue. The point is, a lot of the things he talks about are actually valuable, and one thing that he did talk about was the Hare Krishna mantra, which there are 16 words in that mantra, and I believe he said that if you say that 16-word mantra 16 times, 16 words, 16 rounds total, then it will highly enhance your consciousness. So if there is truth to that, for all those people that don't understand why that is the case, why does that work, and why should people consider maybe taking a couple minutes out of every day just to say the Hare Krishna mantra 16 times in a row?
Well, first of all, Andrew, I'm very impressed with your knowledge of things. I did not expect you to have as clear an understanding as what you've just described. Let me see if I can elaborate briefly on that. According to these ancient books of wisdom that date back from before recorded history, called the Vedas, which is based in India, they're sometimes considered Indian texts. The creation around us is founded on sound. Sound is considered the original generating element of creation, that the first element to come into existence was sound, and from sound, air, and from air, the power of touch. And so there's the various sense organs that are generated by those different elements over a kind of evolutionary process. But because sound was the first element of creation, it's also the subtlest, and therefore the most powerful. You use the right sound and you can smash a window or a glass of water. My wife is in the jewelry business, and you can polish gems and jewelry by putting them in a liquid and then sending sound vibration into the liquid. So it has a cleansing capability. Consciousness is stimulated by articulating the right sound. Consciousness can also be polluted by saying the wrong kinds of sounds. One of the hardest things for me after coming back to New York after 13 years living in ashram environments was the change in the quality of sound. All those years from age 19 to age 32, every day I would rise early in the morning. We would get up early, and we would do meditations. And like you said, quite right, we'd chant the Hare Krishna mantra, or the spiritual sound. And all day long we'd be surrounded by recordings of Prabhupada singing prayers and chanting mantras. And the discussions were all about philosophy and the Bhagavad Gita. And it was a very peaceful, enlivening, purifying sound environment. Coming back to New York, sound was so aggressive. Cars and machinery and people talking about everything else except Krishna. It was a very, very difficult adjustment. But by that chanting, you can remember something that you've forgotten, namely that you're an eternal being, that within the body, the thing that makes the body alive, the thing that makes all bodies live, is a spark of consciousness. That Atma, or spark of consciousness, is not material. It's immortal. It's indestructible. You can't destroy a soul. That spark is beyond any material influence. But we've forgotten it, according to the Vedic text, because we've been reincarnating so many times, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, that we forgot what our original nature is like. And now we identify with the body and mind. If I'm in a male body, I have a male ego. If I'm in a white body, I've got a white ego. If I'm an American, I have an American ego. All these external titles and tags and labels are extraneous to the deep core self, which is the same in everyone. So that chanting reawakens that original consciousness. And I do it. I get up in the morning early. I'm usually up by 5. And in my office room, I have a little shelf where I keep some sacred objects that I brought back from India. And I have beads, prayer beads called japa. And on those beads, as you rightly said, there's 108 beads. And I'll go around those beads 16 times, on each bead chanting that mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And it's a wonderful way to start the day. I mean, instead of, I call it the latte syndrome, you wake up, your feet hit the ground, you grab your latte, and you're off and running, right? And basically, whoever you are today is whoever you were yesterday, and nothing's changed. If you give yourself the privilege of sitting down first thing in the morning, practicing some deep breaths, and as long as you're doing deep breaths, chant this mantra, your day will change. Andrew, I'll promise you, I'll make you a promise right here, you and any of your listeners. If you do one mantra every day, just never mind 16, that mantra one time in the morning, take a deep breath, relax, sit comfortably, and chant that Hare Krishna mantra for 1 week. If you don't experience a real change in your life, I will send you a free copy of my book. And that offer is valid for any of your listeners.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. And people will often be very picky about the way you're supposed to pronounce it. I mean, some people say Hare, some would say Hare. I mean, and all the other words in there's a certain way they're very picky about how you should pronounce it, and others say no. As long as it doesn't really matter how you pronounce it, as long as you articulate it in a way that shows you're serious about it, then consciousness will reward you. But then again, like I said, there's those who are picky about pronunciation. So if you really have to be picky about pronunciation, do you? And if you do, could you please clarify the pronunciation of all the words in that 16-word mantra?
It's a good question, and the answer is really very simple. The right way to chant the mantra, which is a prayer after all, is from your heart. How you say something is more, what your feelings are behind what you say is more important than the technicalities of how you say it. So whether you're pronouncing it, with proper Sanskrit inflections, or when I was in France, people would be chanting with a French accent. They go, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. That's like the farthest away from Sanskrit you can get. But as long as it's sincere, if it's from the heart, it's a prayer. The meaning of that mantra is, my dear Lord, please allow me to serve you. Hare is a vocative form of the Sanskrit word hara, which is a name of Radha, divinity in female form, and Krishna means all attractive. It's a very universal name for the Supreme Being, the one who is all attractive. And Rama means, by chanting God's names, the greatest pleasure is generated. So it's not Hindu. It's a universal prayer, and as long as it's from the heart, there's an old Sufi saying: words that come only from the lips never get past the ears of the listener. Words from the heart touch the heart. So if you're sincere, it doesn't really matter if there's some discrepancies in the pronunciation.
Well, I think a lot of people can consider that to be very, very reassuring, because I do know a lot of people that would be very picky about that. But moving on to the being Krishna, I did make sure in the slideshow for this interview, I did put a picture of the being. Why does Krishna, well, first of all, is it male, female, androgynous? And why does Krishna look like the way he, she, or it looks like?
I had that same question the first time I saw a picture of Krishna. I asked the devotee, how come he looks like a girl?
So it's a male that looks like a girl. Okay.
Well, he's very very beautiful. He's got long hair, long black hair, and it's a very smooth figure. He's not some macho, muscle-bound guy. And the answer I got was very satisfying. The person I was speaking to, his name was Umapati, said to me, well, if God is the source of everything, then he's also the source of beauty and elegance in women. So if he's attractive to everyone, it's because he possesses all of the most attractive qualities. And that was pretty good. That was a pretty good answer. It's a very profound question that you're asking. Why does Krishna look the way he does? If I were among your listeners right now, and I'm not a believer, I'd be saying, this whole thing's beginning to sound way too much like religion to me. I'm just not interested. The supreme being and oh my Lord, let me serve. It really does sound like religion. So I just wanted to say something to reassure any of your listeners who may be concerned about that. God doesn't interest me very much. I've come to realize after being in Krishna yoga for almost a half century now, that the notion of God, as that word is generally understood, I find dangerous and boring, quite honestly. The word has been preempted by everybody. Religion is used as the handmaiden of tyranny. So much pain and suffering have been inflicted in the name of God that I don't care to go there. Krishna, on the other hand, fascinates me, and I would love to get to know Krishna. The idea that the source of there's really only two choices. Either this majestic, beautiful creation around us is a joke, it sprang out of nothing, or else there's consciousness and intentionality creation. I have a hard time accepting that life is a big mistake, some kind of cosmic boo-boo. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I do believe that I am not the body, that I'm the soul, that this life has purpose, that I've lived before, and that I will live again after the death of this body. I feel that in my bones. I know it in my heart. And the idea that behind this is a relationship of love, that fascinates me. The idea that life is for love, that idea blows my mind. And I can tell you quite honestly that philosophy behind Krishna consciousness or Krishna yoga has saved a lot of friendships, I think, in my life that otherwise would have dissolved. It's for sure saved my marriage. And it has enhanced, more than I can tell you, my relationship with my two children. And I'm very, very grateful for that. So while religion bores me, Krishna has me heart and soul.
But one might ask, even though religion could be equated with brainwashing and consciousness suppression, many of the religious figures, it would be wrong to say they don't exist. I mean, Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis has flat out stated Jesus did exist. He was a solar being, a human incarnate of the sun, but his story has been twisted, and that raises a whole new can of worms about maybe Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, and Buddha, and Muhammad, and all the other, the Greco-Roman gods and all, and maybe they all existed, but their stories have all been twisted. And just want to get this out, Jordan Maxwell has said there's one major difference between religion and mythology. You wouldn't call something a religion unless you believe it to be true, and it's your set of beliefs. You wouldn't call something mythology unless someone else believed it and you did not believe it to be true. That, Jordan Maxwell asserts, is the only major difference between religion and mythology. And regardless of whether you call it religion or mythology, there are those that say, all the religious figures and mythological figures of that history, they did exist. Their stories have been twisted. And not only that, you open up a whole new can of worms when you start talking about parallel universes and realms, and also how thoughts manifest. Like, enough people in a large enough religious congregation were thinking of an entity called Jesus, then those thoughts alone, you would have to think, would have to create a Jesus entity, maybe not in this matrix reality we're in, but maybe in some other realm or reality that you could, if you create a wormhole, hypothetically travel into. I know we're going off the deep end here, but this idea that all these religious figures do exist because thoughts manifest and their stories have all been twisted and all for statements.
Well, I mean, you better believe that things have been distorted over time, and that people abuse religion for their own purposes. You know the old saying, the devil interprets scripture to his ends. You can read a verse from the Bible or a verse from the Bhagavad Gita and twist it 10 different ways to Sunday. Charles Manson, the very deranged fellow from the 60s who had his acolytes murder young nursing students, was asked by a reporter when Manson was captured and put in prison, "Why did you do that?" Manson said, "Oh, well, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita. And in the Bhagavad Gita it says that the soul is eternal, and so even if you slay, the soul is not slain." You can twist anything you want. The thing that always impresses me is when I meet, you can call them religious leaders if you like, who have gone really deep into the study of their tradition. They come to a point where the differences of cultures and rituals and time and place seem to fall away, and there's a kind of camaraderie among elevated spiritual people. And by that I mean also religious leaders from particular traditions who have, you might say, transcended the material part of their religion and gone to its, let's call it the mystical roots. If you go into the Kabbalistic tradition of Judaism, or the mystic traditions of Christianity, or the Sufi tradition of Islam, or the Bhakti, Krishna traditions of India, you reach a point where there are some basic truths that everyone seems to agree upon. What are those truths? One, again, that we're not the body, that we're an eternal soul that animates this body with consciousness. We've forgotten that we are an eternal soul, and consequently we've become very defensive, identifying with our material group, community, nation, whatever it may be. But that original consciousness can be revived through meditation, chanting of mantras, contemplative practices, and leading a clean life. And I want to emphasize that. You can't achieve wisdom just by studying a book. Wisdom is revealed to us when we are prepared to receive it. And that's why it's so important that we study the character of religious leaders and spiritual leaders, because if they're not walking their talk, you have every reason to doubt what they're telling you. And when I met Prabhupada, I met someone who walked his talk. That's why I ended up becoming a practitioner of bhakti or devotional yoga, because I met someone who embodied that. I know Krishna has to be real. I spent months traveling with Prabhupada back in the 70s. I've seen his love for Krishna. Nobody could, you were talking about mythology, nobody could love a myth as profoundly as Prabhupada loved Krishna. Just not possible. So I was one of those lucky ones who got to spend time with one of those great souls, who had transcended his material identity. That was a real privilege, and I'm always going to be grateful for that.
Yes, grateful for it too, and because it gives all new subjects, different things to enlighten us on, different things to contemplate, think about, a little variety to life. And on that note, one thing that people seem to have noticed throughout some religious texts, some religious texts more so than others, I want to ask if you by any chance have noticed any differences in any of the texts that you look at. Maybe perhaps you've heard of the phenomenon known as the Mandela effect, which comes from the idea that Nelson Mandela did actually die when he was in prison, but then was somehow brought back to life because timelines seem to intermerge with each other. And in the present day, we have the Berenstain Bears phenomenon, where the name Berenstain, it's spelled Berenstain now, S-T-A-I-N, when everybody would remember back in the day, it was actually at the end of the name spelled S-T-E-I-N, and they say that timelines have collapsed and intermingled with each other, and that's caused that to happen. And I was watching some videos by Mr. Cat Eye, who decodes a lot of things and such, and he was talking about how some Christian texts that he knows of seem to say things differently than what he and other people remember them, and they think maybe now the Mandela effect is having a very pronounced effect on religious texts. Have you by any chance noticed any of that in the texts that you have looked at?
Wow. Okay. But let me preface this by saying I consider myself very open-minded, and I don't doubt that there are some amazing things happening in the world around us. Some of them I've experienced myself. We don't need to talk about that in this interview. This is just a first date. We're getting to know each other. So I can't speak to subjects that I haven't studied or that I don't know about. What I can say is that it's a seller's market, so let the buyer beware. If you're thinking about getting into spiritual practice, whether it's mantras or yoga or study of sacred texts or whatever it may be, do some homework first. Don't just pick up any edition of a book and start reading. Do some background checking. Who's the author? Who's the translator? What are their credentials? Do they have the academic credentials, for example, to translate a book from Aramaic or from Sanskrit or whatever the language may be? Where have they gotten their training? Where did they get their understanding? Is it just their word, or do they come in a tradition? One of the things that made me very comfortable about Prabhupada is that he was the current link in a chain of teachers known in Sanskrit as the Guru Parampara, which means that over the course of history, the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita and the other Sanskrit texts were passed down from teacher to disciple and teacher to disciple over generations and generations and millennia, and represented without change by teachers who had realized those teachings and who had studied them and received them in the proper lineage. So for me, that was a kind of check and balance, that the edition of the Gita that Prabhupada wrote had merit, had authenticity. So whatever the practice is that someone might be interested in pursuing, they might want to just be really cautious and do some homework first.
Oh, yes, and I always try to do my homework whenever I'm talking about these things. I like to speculate, but then again, I try to cite my sources and all. A couple of things about India I want to talk about. India, it's kind of strange how they can have like a couple official languages. The Hindu language and English are both official languages of India. Now, you try to come to America and you don't learn English, everybody will say you should be ashamed of yourself not trying to come to America and not learning the language. For all intents and purposes, I was talking about earlier in the news intro about immigration, how some say it should be a privilege, and one of the things you got to learn about when you immigrate to this country is you got to learn English. Well, if you live in India, it's rather easy, it seems, for the people to learn two languages, English and Hindu, and how do they do it rather easily? And like in other countries, it's not so easy, many would assert, for people to be able to learn two languages. I mean, Canada, they say English and French are the official languages, but that's only in Quebec where they speak French. But India, you go almost everywhere, you will see people who can speak both Hindu and English. So how do they do it in India, for all those people that don't understand how they pull that off?
Well, remember that in the case of India, you have a nation that for more than 1,500 years was under foreign subjugation. And it reached a point where in the mid-1800s, the intelligentsia of India, known as the Bhadraloka, centered in Calcutta, which was kind of the Oxford of its day, decided that anyone who really wants to make a mark in the world coming out of India has to speak English, which is the universal language, is the language of the European enlightened thinkers. And they turned their back on their own culture. Now that's been, remedied since then, and there's a greater pride in the indigenous Indian culture that's come up since independence. But the point is, and I'm not skirting your question, but I'd like to think I'm getting to the heart of it. I have a lot of friends here in America. They speak perfect English, but what they say is such a load of crap. I'm not sure that the issue is, have you learned to speak English? Andrew, I think the real issue is what's in your heart. And whether you express that in Hindi or in Spanish or in French or Chinese or English or whatever your tongue may be, what's important is the quality of the content. And I think sometimes we get distracted by externals. What are the criteria for living in America? If speaking English is the only criteria for living in America, why do we have so much crime among Native Americans, by which I mean people born here? You don't have to be an immigrant to be a criminal. You look at, we have the largest prison population in the world. There is a greater percentage of American citizens behind bars in America than in any other country relative to that population. You got to ask yourself, what's going on here? It can't just be an immigration problem. There's something else going on. And what that something else is a lack of character. I think we've gotten so caught up in being American that we've forgotten what it means to be good human beings. And part of being a good human being is, whatever the language is that you speak, learn the dignity of life. We've got to go back to some basics here. And I think that's what Prabhupada was teaching. He was trying to get people to go back to basics. Keep your nose clean. Live a clean life. Get rid of bad habits. And get over yourself. Your life's not that bad. Now, I'm someone who teaches about the Holocaust. I promise you, there isn't anyone listening to this show whose life is so miserable that it can hold a candle up to most of the people I've been studying from the Holocaust period. So Prabhupada's point was, learn to live like a civilized human being, develop respect for others, and watch the magic happen. A lot of problems would go away if we just got over our own prejudices, our own biases, our own suspicions, and cleaned up our own act. Charity starts at home. Clean up there, and then see what you can do.
Yeah, another thing about India that people find to be quite strange is that even though it's many parts of India are rather impoverished and such, many people living in poverty, many people that are there seem to be relatively high morale, upbeat, generally jolly and all that. I mean, some people that come to India say, I came here for spiritual enlightenment, but when I came here, I saw that it was filled with slums and devastating lifestyles, and I'm thinking, oh my God, there's nothing spiritual about this. But yet, the people there, they seemed generally happy and such. Now, Simon Atkins, who became well known last year for talking about the whole Wave X thing in September 2015, among other things. There's other things he's talked about. Simon Atkins an interview he did on In5D Radio, he was talking about how the people of India, they're barefoot all the time, and that helps them be happy. It's not that they so much want to be barefoot, it's that they can't afford shoes, so they're impoverished, but that by in and of itself allows them to be happy all the time. And people in America aren't barefoot as much, so they seem to be a lot more grumpy and such. So for people that don't understand the science behind how that works and how it can make you happy, could you maybe enlighten people on how that works out and why would people make people happy even though they're living in extreme poverty?
Well, this may not be the answer you were looking for, but India has an immigration problem. For too many years, they've allowed foreigners into their nation. First the Mughals, then the British, and everyone exploited the country. And when India finally gained independence in 1947, they were left in shambles. They were so ravaged by immigrants coming from Europe and America that the country has yet to recover. First of all, I disagree with the whole characterization of, India as a nation of barefoot people. That's a lot of hogwash. I don't question anyone's, legal right, to have an opinion, whatever it may be. I question their moral and ethical right to say something like that. Have they gone to India? Have they actually been there? Do they even know any Indians? I mean, what kind of wild-eyed, overblown, myth is this? There's as much poverty in America as there is in India. We may not see it because we love to hide that sort of stuff, but it's there. There are people who go barefoot in this country. That's not the image that we depict. India, unfortunately, has had an image problem for a very, very long time. But if you get to know the culture, it's elegant, it's beautiful, it's inspiring, and it's got a much older history than America. We're a pop nation. We've only been around for a couple 100 years. We're still trying to figure it out. They've been around a very long time, and there's an immense contribution that the Indian culture has given to the world, starting with mathematics. I mean, this is a whole other topic. I think rather than dignifying those kinds of gross exaggerations and characterizations, suffice it to say, chill out a little bit here. We shouldn't be quite so quick to just jump to conclusions about a people. There's no such thing as the Indian way of life. There are men and women and children and individuals who make choices, just as there are here in America. I go through this all the time in my Holocaust studies, where people talk about the American Jewish experience. I called 20 of my Jewish friends and asked them, what is the American Jewish experience? And not one of them said there is such a thing. None of them even identified with that idea. Each individual has a particular reaction to the world around them. And I think we need to be a little cautious about, hysterical language which can polarize people and cause problems, even violence. Don't you agree?
Yes, I definitely agree. Watch what you say. Don't want to. Some people may take something as racist, even though it's not necessarily taken racist. Classic example being blacks using the N-word, not taken as racist, but if a white uses it in the presence of blacks, you can expect the black is going to punch them in the face or something like that. I mean, that's kind of going off the deep end there, but it kind of does make the point about how people are tolerant and intolerant for some of the most trivial of reasons, be it skin color, whatever. But switching gears, let's talk about George Harrison for a bit. I noticed it came up in conversation a bit. Yeah, totally switching gears here, going from India lifestyle to George Harrison. Now, I bring this up because in one of my previous interviews with I wish I remember the guy's name. He talked about how the Beatles were actually a Illuminati creation of sorts. They were invented as not so much to brainwash society, but to steer society in a certain way. And let me make it clear that there is a mountain of evidence to show that the current Paul McCartney is not the original Paul McCartney. The whole Paul is dead theory has a lot of truth to it, and the Beatles did change and that was in 1966 when the replacement happened, and the Beatles did change their style after that. Now, this whole thing about the Beatles being a creation to steer society in a certain direction, maybe it was the Tavistock Institute that he said created the Beatles. I could be mistaken about that. For some reason, that's jumping out at me. But George Harrison, I mean, he was enlightened by Swami, but yet at the same time, he was part of a creation to steer society in a certain direction, and that would seem to conflict, one would say, with the enlightenment he received from Swami. So what's your take on this whole thing about George Harrison and the Beatles being some sort of a creation that was designed to either brainwash or at best?
Well, I mean, you do have to ask yourself, a group that had that much influence on world culture had to have had something unusual going for them. I'm curious to know, Andrew, do you have any idea what the demographics are of your listenership? I mean, are there enough people listening to your show who are old enough to have actually been around when the Beatles were performing? Or are they mostly younger? Or we don't know.
It's a hodgepodge. It's a hodgepodge.
Because, I mean, you really know you're getting older when, when you overhear someone in a record store saying, I understand that Paul McCartney was within a band before Wings. So sometimes I have to remind myself that not even everybody even remembers who they are today. And I have to explain who the Beatles were when I give some of my lectures and why they were so influential and important. I guess, I don't know, for me, when I was a teenager, the Beatles were at their peak. And what I remember of my own emotions from that day and those of my friends from back then was that these guys represent hope. They represent a brighter future. Now, let me just briefly explain for your listeners that when the Beatles first performed in America, it was February 1964 on the Ed Sullivan television show, just 3 months after the Kennedy assassination. The nation was in mourning. We were as low as you could get as a people. And in those days, there were only 3 channels on television anyway. So in February of 64, everyone happened to have been watching the Ed Sullivan show when the Beatles appeared for the first time on U.S. television. At the end of the first set, they were singing a song called She Loves You, which was a #1 hit on the charts. The last words are, you know you should be glad. No one had ever told us we could be glad again. No one had ever told us that we had the right to be happy and to recover from all of the tragedies around us. The Kennedy assassination, the Cold War. I remember being in elementary school and learning how to hide under my desk in case of an atomic bomb. Like that was going to help. It was a really, really tough, dark time. And so these guys they were floating above all that. And of the 4 of them, George was the most spiritual. Now, if you go online, you'll find, as you quite rightly said, there's a Beatles religion. I don't know whether it's called Beatles, whatever it's called, but, it talks about getting in touch with your inner Ringo and how, all of us have qualities of each of the 4 Beatles inside us. And it's this whole very elaborate explanation. And I suppose, but people ascribed those kinds of mystic powers to Hitler. Anyone who has that kind of influence over such a large part of the world rises above ordinary mortal status. Right? So, without really knowing much about parallel universes and other kinds of explanations for that, what I can say is that George Harrison in particular is now and will forever be remembered as much for his spiritual message as for his beautiful music. When George met Prabhupada, that set him on a course that lasted for the rest of his life. It showed him that there was more to life than meets the eye, and that there's a spiritual, eternal dimension that has to do with love between people and between people and a supreme being, and he got very, very turned on by that. He once described himself as someone who had made it to the top of the material mountain and then looked over and saw how much more there was on the other side. And I wrote a book about him as well as a thank you called Here Comes the Sun. Arguably the two most important influences in my life spiritually are Prabhupada and then George, who was a wonderful, warm human being and always had words of encouragement. Back in those days, I had the privilege of recording with him at Apple Studios. And he was just the nicest guy, And I remember asking him one time, how's your spiritual life, George? And he thought about it very seriously and said, well, I'm having trouble with this whole guru thing. I asked him, why do you think that is? Thought seriously again, said, well, it must be my karma. Must be me karma is the way he said it. I mean, he would respond to you if you talked to him like a real human being. If you approached him with that little, twinkle in your eye, like, oh, I'm with a beetle now, he would walk away. He didn't want to have anything to do with that illusory material image. Very, very special human being.
Well, sometimes you just take people at face value, and regardless of whether there was some sort of a plot to use the Beatles to steer society in a certain direction, I'm sure the Beatles at face value were good people, and maybe they were going along to get along to some degree. But enough speculating on that issue. I'd like to talk, getting back to spiritual stuff, in the Hindu and also the Buddhist faith, these are two religions that seem to press something that many in the metaphysical and spiritual community do talk about, and that is the chakra system. Now, this is a subject that's never going to get old on my show, and that is whether or not it is in your best interest to believe that there is a chakra or follow the chakra system. It's not so much that there is. There obviously is such a thing as a chakra system and such, but is it worth it to obsess about it and follow it? Because George Kavaslis, I mentioned him earlier, he's one of my most frequently used sources, and well, he has caused a lot of controversy when he says, I do not follow the whole idea of chakras anymore. I believe it is in my best interest to dissolve, for lack of a better word, dissolve my chakra system into one, and the one place where I dissolve them into is the heart, soul, essence, because chakras, they're all part of the brainwashing. They're all keeping you from believing that you are one whole source, one heart, soul, essence source, infinite consciousness that can branch off into spirit, which he says emanates from soul. Difference between soul and spirits, that like what he says is spirit emanates from souls, like spears emanating from someone who's throwing spears, like spear it. That maybe it's a play on those words. And consciousness also, he says, emanates from soul. And my biggest issue with his claim that you shouldn't talk about dwell on chakra systems is the variety factor, the spice of life factor. I think you're missing out on all the fun if you don't use your chakras every so often to try to tweak around your life. I mean, you can't go wrong doing what he's doing, strictly going with the heart, soul, essence. And if he can't get bored by doing that all the time, well, bless his heart for not getting bored easily. But I still think that for variety's sake, it's a good way to do that. And other people would say would be to not use chakras, like Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis. His Akashic reading skills can basically answer almost any question you throw at him, because he can tap into the Akashic Records to get the answer. He says that his crown chakra is a vital vortex point, so to speak, for him to be able to access the Akashic records. So if he didn't use his chakras, if he followed George's advice, it would probably be a lot harder for him to get the answer to any question, unless, of course, maybe he used the heart soul essence, as George says, to get every answer. But George Kavassilas, I can assert, he cannot answer every single question using his own heart soul essence. I know that because I did a private session with him, just asked him some random questions, like, do you know which moons in the solar system are artificial bodies masquerading as moons besides our moon? And he said, no, I do not. It's not something I keep in my heart soul essence. Well, if he accessed his crown chakra like Andrew Bartzis could, maybe he would be able to answer that question. So this debate, should you use or not use chakras? Do you, for lack of a better question, agree or disagree?
Well, let's not assume that everybody listening into this conversation even understands what chakras are. So why don't I just begin by giving a very quick overview of that idea. In the ancient text, and you're right, it's there in both Hindu and Buddhist sources, there are energy circles or levels in the body that correspond to different kinds of behavior. The lower chakras, on the level of the anus, the genitals, the stomach, correspond to more animal instinct behavior. As the self, as the real energy of consciousness is raised up through these chakras, so different kinds of meditative practices, you achieve higher levels of understanding, awareness, wisdom. So raising the life air from those lower chakras, for example, to the heart chakra, will open up greater compassion toward family and friends, raising them up again to ultimately to what is called the Brahmarandhra, which is the point where the three parts of the skull join at the top of the head. If you've ever held a newborn baby, that top of the head is very, very soft because those three sections of the cranium have not yet fused. So that small point there is called the Brahmarandhra. And very elevated yogis are capable of raising their life air through the various chakra or energy fields and systems in the body, those levels or circles, to that Brahmarandhra point. And then at an auspicious moment, when planets are in the proper alignment, they leave their body. They literally burst through that small pinpoint hole and can project themselves to whatever particular or upper realm that they may wish to go to. This is the mystic yoga system. It's even described in the Bhagavad Gita, as well as the tantric texts and so on of India. So there's a lot of history behind what you're describing. But how do we make that real? How do we bring that down to a place where your listeners can kind of make it practical for themselves in their life? Maybe we can do that by, instead of calling them chakras, call them stages of growth, stages of maturing, of becoming an adult. There are somewhat similar levels of elevation even in psychology, where moving away from childish dependencies and the needs-driven behavior that pushes us to be selfish and to grab things and to want and covet things beyond a healthy limit can be improved upon, with the proper kind of education and training and practice. You can leave those hurtful, unhealthy habits behind and raise behavior up to these other levels. So, part of the challenge for me as someone who lectures every week in different venues is to find a contemporary vocabulary to end these concepts. To your point, yes, I would agree that we can't artificially jump up to some very, very high chakra. That's dangerous. To pretend to be more spiritually advanced than you are will get you in trouble, and it's going to get people around you in trouble as well. Patanjali, who is the codifier of the yoga text called Yoga Sutras, made it very clear that one should practice the elevation of the life force through the various chakras with respect to two principles, satya and ahimsa. Satya means honesty, to be honest about yourself, not to pretend that you're more advanced than you really are. Cultivate a little humility in your life. And ahimsa means nonviolence, meaning don't hurt yourself, whether it's by attempting physical yoga postures that you're not ready for, or by jumping up to some higher chakra, some higher level of being in the world that you can't sustain. You know, let's take a practical point, practical example. If there's violence going on in the world, well, maybe we'd like to get involved and resolve that somehow. But unless you've got the proper skills, you could get hurt. You just don't go into a situation of violence without knowing what you're doing. So there are skills in every arena. And I believe what I'm hearing you say is something that I can agree with, namely, be honest and be nonviolent in your approach to life. So if you're not a very elevated soul and you have to have your material pleasures or whatever, those other chakra levels, yeah, there's a right way to go about that too. And the right way is minimize the damage. If you have to drink, don't drink so heavily that you endanger your life and the life of others. If you have to indulge in whatever you have to indulge in, why don't you cut back? Why don't you try to modify it so that it doesn't do harm? And the proper way to do that is by finding something else that you enjoy doing even more. And that's what the yoga practice is all about. It's by transferring that interest to a higher interest. This is a verse in the Bhagavad Gita. One can maintain his material life without being so self-destructive about it if you can find something else that is equally or of greater interest. That's where the bhakti practices come in. That's where good company and the chanting and the different kind of diet and the festivals and it's a rich culture. The yoga, bhakti yoga culture is very exciting and very absorbing. So I think I can agree. If I've understood you properly, Andrew, I think I can agree with what you were saying.
Let's agree to disagree for the hell of it, or agree to agree, or agree to disagree on everything. That's one of the questions I frequently ask to my guests on the show. Do you agree or disagree? It's a critical question to ask when you're trying to expose the nature of reality on multiple different subjects. But getting back to the subject of chakras and also DNA, there's been a lot of talk about how as Earth's vibrational energy is increasing, its consciousness is rising and all that. Many other chakras besides the main seven are being activated, and also many parts of our DNA that were suppressed are being activated. So the subject of chakra activation and DNA activation, do you have any knowledge and wisdom you'd like to talk about regarding those subjects?
Well, it's an important one when we talk about consciousness, because science is still unable to definitively explain how consciousness comes into being. We have transferred the idea of a transcendental soul or atma in the body over the course of the last 300 years to the brain, and from the brain to the mind, and from the mind to different neurological networks. And we go back and forth attempting to find a definition to what we are. What is our deepest essence? DNA is the blueprint of what we are in this life. It's a collection of proteins, and it's an acid, deoxyribose nucleic acid. That's a material substance. As much as it may determine behavior, it is not the original source activity. What is it that animates the body? Whatever your particular DNA may be, whatever your particular chakra level may be, where does the energy come from that animates you? If you get hurt and die, what's different? All of the chemicals and limbs and organs and neurological networks, they're still there. What's not there anymore is the life force. That life force that animates the body with consciousness, that's the real self. And that's the subject of Bhakti Yoga. It's the subject of Bhagavad Gita, the subject of all the wisdom traditions, is to come to know ourselves on that level that even predates our DNA. So while these are important to understand how we behave, and thank goodness there's been so much progress made in different fields where we can address diseases and different kinds of health issues through recombinant engineering and preventive measures, we still don't understand the real nature of consciousness. That's something that lies in a different field of research, where you become the laboratory, you become the experiment, and you go deep within yourself to recognize your true eternal nature.
Thank you. Go within, use the sermon, and you'll get answers to many questions. Also, one way to enhance chakras that has been asserted by some, including Santos Bonacci. Hey, I mentioned him again. People are going to say, don't mention him as a source. He's a lunatic because he believes in flat earth. Hey, flat earth theory aside, that's not important. He has a lot of valuable things to teach, I think. And one thing that Santos did say in a recent interview that I listened to was how we need to spend a lot more time eating flowers and herbs and berries, and he says people that eat meat should be ashamed of themselves because they're going to have a tough time resolving karma. I mean, say what you want about that, but that's not really what I want to talk about here. I want to talk about how he says eating flowers, and I believe he specifically said there is a certain types of flowers can enhance your chakras, and I believe he said the crown chakra can be specifically enhanced by eating flowers. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, part of the reason for writing Prabhupada's biography was to get that point across to people, that while it may seem external and simplistic, your whole life can turn around with proper diet. George Bernard Shaw said, you are what you eat, and there's a lot of truth in that. Food affects consciousness. And there are different kinds of diets. Each has its particular philosophical or nutritional background and reason for being. Some people become vegan, some people become vegetarian but still eat dairy products, some people vegetarian but eat eggs, other people don't become vegetarian, some people eat anything. There is an effect, though, in consciousness. And I'm not so sure. You got to remember, I've been in this line of just for nearly 50 years now, and my radar has expanded, you might say. I remember talking about vegetarianism in one yoga class here in New York, and a hand went up in the room, and it was someone I had seen in, this was a series of classes, this is someone who had been to them in weeks gone by, and she said, I just have to object to something. I am not vegetarian. And I'm getting tired of coming here week after week and feeling like I'm being put down because I'm not a vegetarian. I love these classes. I love what you have to say about the Bhagavad Gita. I chant Hare Krishna every morning just like Prabhupada recommended. But I tried being vegetarian and I was getting very weak and sick. And my doctors recommended that I add meat back into my diet, and I've been less sick ever since. So that was a kind of a wake-up call for me to be careful about not coming off holier than thou about the topic of vegetarianism. It's true that most of these great palliative yoga traditions recommend a vegetarian diet, in large measure because it's hypocritical to talk about developing love and compassion for all beings while condoning the slaughter of animals. It's like pouring fuel on the fire. It's a little hard to do that. However, if we look at, let's say, the lifestyle of Native Americans, there was a very revered tradition among the Native Americans that if they had to kill a buffalo or a deer or whatever the animal might be, they would offer prayers to that animal, that in order to feed my tribe, I'm obliged to take your life. Kindly forgive me for this, and thank you for having sacrificed yourself for the well-being of my people. So there was you might say, a mindfulness, an intentionality behind it, as opposed to going into a food store and grabbing a pre-wrapped, pound of ground beef or whatever, and not thinking about what you're doing. And I think that may be the point. Whether you're eating this flour or that lamb chop, are you being conscientious about what you're doing? Or you're just on automatic pilot? If you're on automatic pilot, you can never make any particular advancement in what you're doing. You're always going to be defeating yourself by your own behavior. I think the idea is to become more aware of everything that we do. Reading labels, for example. Are you buying food with palm oil? A lot of peanut butter and other kinds of dishes that you'll buy in jars have palm oil. Well, palm oil is harvested by destroying animal habitats and killing off species. A lot of the ape species depend on habitats where there's clear cutting and planting of palm trees to harvest the palm oil. Being conscientious about these things does make a difference.
No question. I often sign petitions regarding things like that, like try not to use palm oil and all that kind of things to help the environment, help nature and all that. We've got to try to become one with nature to try to be conscientious of that, to enhance our consciousness and such. But, all right, switching gears, talk about meditation. You mentioned like meditation styles and all that. A couple different things about meditation I want to talk about. This subject's never going to get old. I mentioned it over and over. But whether meditation can be good or bad regarding whether meditation becomes a ritual. I mentioned George Kavassilis again, frequently used source. Like I said, he said that he doesn't meditate as much as he used to, and he said that sometimes meditation can be harmful. And when I did a private session with him, I asked him, well, can you clarify what you mean by that? And he said meditation can become harmful if you turned it into ritual, obsessing about it in such a way that would turn it into a ritual. But then again, there are others that say you want to try to get into the habit of doing your spiritual and religious work at a certain same time, same place, same and all that, because it's good to get in those habits. And then like those that would disagree with that, like maybe he would say, because then you're getting into a ritual. So this whole idea of meditation and other spiritual practices becoming harmful if you make a ritual out of it. Do you know maybe what they're talking about? Could you perhaps clarify this issue?
Meditation means to focus the mind on a single point. So in that sense, a good doctor is meditating when he or she focuses completely on the task at hand with a patient. An artist dedicated to the craft meditates. A figure skater can be a meditator if he or she takes that creative talent seriously. There's a Hungarian psychologist named Csikszentmihalyi who wrote a book back in the 80s called Flow, F-L-O-W, in which he talked about what he called peak experience, which is a kind of meditative state. He went around the world interviewing every imaginable kind of category of people with his team of researchers, from blind Sherpa cheesemakers in Tibet to the head of Sony Studios to poets and artists and athletes, pretty much everybody. And what he found was that though people share a kind of happiness when they are absorbed in what they're doing is righteous work, when they feel competent to do that work. Certain things happen when you're in that experience. Time seems to slow down. The reason for doing what you're doing is not that at the end you're going to have a finished painting and you can sell it and make money. It's the act of doing the painting or planting the garden or whatever it may be. So, first of all, by understanding meditation as a complete dedication of ourselves to a particular calling, I think we can demystify the idea of meditation as being something where you're just kind of sitting boringly in one posture, staring at a candle or a doorknob or something. That's not meditation. So when this person you referenced talks about meditation becoming dangerous, when it becomes a ritual, I can't claim to know what this person was talking about, but what I can say is that meditation without following through after the conclusion of meditation can be dangerous. And meditation, in other words, in the Bhagavad Gita, means to understand who we are. Ultimately, meditation means to come to that deep self who can perform of great charity and contribution to the larger world. Once you've come to that conclusion of meditation, knowing who you are, that's when bhakti yoga begins. That's when devotional service begins. What is the activity that happens after you've achieved the perfection of your meditation? That's devotion to God or Krishna consciousness. So if your purpose in meditating, if your purpose in doing anything is selfish, if it's purely monetary, sure, I can see how meditation could become harmful. But proper meditation means to understand yourself as an eternal being and then to begin acting in that capacity.
And on the subject of meditation, I think I know what answer you're going to give listening to what you've been saying, but I got to ask anyway, just for the sake of making this a worthwhile conversation. Meditation style. There are those that would say, well, the best way to meditate without question is to acknowledge that you are infinite consciousness, you are infinite love, and utilize that to your advantage by, when you meditate, radiate love out from your heart chakra or your heart's whole essence and just keep radiating love. It doesn't make sense to bring anything into you when you're meditating. It only makes sense to make the most out of it and just radiate love throughout all of consciousness to, like I said, make the most of your meditation. Now, my biggest issue with that is, once again, the variety factor. You're missing out on the spice of life that is variety if you don't tweak and alter your meditation styles. But if you can meditate all the time with the mentality of always, whenever you meditate, radiate love, nothing else, and never get bored by that, well, hallelujah, bless your heart for not being able to get bored. But like I said, I did it because of the lack of variety in that. So the debate as to whether or not it is, without question, the best way to meditate is to radiate love all the time when you meditate, or there is no right or wrong way. Do you agree or disagree? What's your take on this?
If I were sitting in a yoga class and someone said, radiate love, I'd probably get up and leave. I have no idea what that means. A lot of the stuff that you just said, frankly, I'm not talking about you because you were quoting someone else. But it strikes me as the kind of rhetoric that people who really don't understand the first thing about spiritual practices spout on a moment's notice because there's something vaguely feel-good about it, but if you unpack it, it has zero substance. I go to yoga school sometime where I'm asked to speak, and I'll go early intentionally to attend the yoga class and listen to what the instructors are saying, and they'll come up with stuff. Andrew, I swear, I don't know what they're saying. Let go of your karmas and let go of your kleshas and, lose your ego. And if you lose your ego, check with Lost and Found at the front desk. I don't know what they're talking about. And yet they're up there as instructors or pretending to be instructors, and I think it's wrong. Personally, I don't think anyone should be allowed to become an instructor of yoga or meditation or whatever it is until they've had a serious grounding in some foundational subjects, namely proper behavior in a teaching environment, because it's very easy for people to take advantage of being perceived as a teacher to exploit their students. So what are the legal, ethical, and moral grounds for being a teacher? Secondly, if you're going to use a term, you damn well better know what it means. You're going to talk about meditation or yoga or karma or whatever, study it. These are profound concepts. You don't just toss them off like cookies. Now, karma, what is karma? Oh, karma is, you get back what you put out there, or it's cause and effect. That's like saying that Monet's painting of water lilies is paint on canvas. I mean, such a shallow definition of something so profound. There's so much more going on there. And it takes years of study to understand what these concepts mean. So my problem is not, whether someone's putting out love or not. My problem is, do they have any idea what they're talking about? And most of the time, unfortunately, they don't.
Well, it's up to us enlightened people to change that so people do know what they're talking about by listening to people like you and radio hosts like me. And let's switch gears. One of your other books, Witness, Voices from the Holocaust. Might as well talk about this because I never could understand where people got the idea or where this expression came from, the Holocaust never happened. Oh, okay, I heard that before, but I don't really know what people are trying to imply when they say that. And, well, I don't know any Jewish people who, in my family and all, because I was never from a Jewish family that was in any of the camps or anything. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, he lived in Poland during the time of World War II, grew up there. He saw the horrors of it, but he was not Jewish, so he never had to worry about going to a camp or anything, but it was still a horrifying experience. And now in the present day, you're talking about, we do have modern-day Auschwitzes with all those FEMA camps that are out there. Now, don't get me wrong. I suppose the FEMA camps, if there was like an economic collapse or something, the FEMA camps could come in handy as a place of refuge. We just got to make sure that the powers that be aren't using them as prisons when we use them as places of refuge, which is probably what they were intended to do. Just watch the Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura episode on the police state FEMA camp episode. That was taken down after one airing because the powers that be didn't want people to see that. But hey, I'm digressing. The Holocaust, maybe you could clarify exactly what people are talking about when they say a Holocaust never happened, and then give your general 2 cents in on what the Holocaust is all about pertaining to your book.
Okay, this is another 66 years and 66 seconds. Maybe I should start by saying, it would be reasonable if someone listening to this conversation says, "How did we get here? We're talking about yoga and chakras. How do we end up in the Holocaust?" When I came out of temple life, it was 1982. I went into religious studies. I was taking my 13 years of ashram life and kind of putting an academic foundation under them. And I ended up studying the Holocaust period and finding that it challenged my view of the universe as a benign and beneficent place. People would always ask me, "You're such a spiritual guy. How do you reconcile your Krishna beliefs with what happened in Europe 70 years ago? I mean, how do those two things fit in the same world?" And I didn't have a good answer. And I got tired of not having an answer. So I went deeper into the subject. So I'm still not King Solomon, mind you. I don't have all the answers, and I'll be the first one to admit that the Holocaust challenges our understanding of our own humanness, how it was possible for people to become so cruel toward others. When we ask why certain individuals would deny, first of all, we have to qualify this. Deniers don't call themselves deniers. They call themselves revisionists. Most people who wish to challenge the validity of the Holocaust, by which they mean the destruction of European Jewry, more than 6 million Jews killed in the camps and elsewhere during the Nazi era, they don't claim that it never happened at all. They claim that it wasn't as bad as Jews make it out to have been. And the justification they give for that claim is that there's lack of evidence, that certain camps had crematoria, that you couldn't possibly burn so many bodies in the certain amount of time that they say it took place, kind of pseudo-scientific arguments for it. Why would they do that? Well, one reason is that they claim Jews assert the Holocaust as a justification for the state of Israel. It's a way of getting sympathy and a support for the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. Other people are simply anti-Semitic, and they want to undermine Jewish credibility. There may be all kinds of reasons for denying the single most studied event in all of human history. The literature, the research, the amount of writing and documentation staggers the imagination. So to claim that this is all somehow fabricated is the workings of a very disturbed mind. I think the real issue here, and I'm trying to make the connection for your listeners, is not so much why would crazy people, insane people claim the Holocaust never happened. Why do rational people, authors and professors and people who seem to have some intelligence, why do they deny the reality of the Holocaust? There's something deep-seated inside us, and I'm not a psychologist, and I can't claim to understand it. There's something deep-seated inside us that is extremely fearful. We're very afraid of what we don't understand. And when we're afraid, we're ready to suspend normal, rational thinking, which is why, for example, after the fall of the towers on 9/11, President Bush was so easily able to convince the American people to suspend constitutional safeguards because he said we are under threat by terrorists. Now, by the way, that happens to have also been Hitler's argument after the burning of the Reichstag in early 1933, that we are under attack by terrorists, therefore I am suspending constitutional law and I'm declaring a police state. Every time we do that, every time we suspend constitutional safeguards, we begin to wear away more and more at the foundations of democracy. And it becomes easier to cross that line the next time, and the next time, and the time after that. So there's a real danger in what we might call that hysterical thinking, which attempts to take advantage of people's fears. We're seeing that today as well. The value of yoga practice, the value of the meditational practices we've been talking about, is that when we respond to events in the world, we can do so from a place of deeper reflection and greater wisdom. It's very important that we learn when our emotions are starting to take over and logic and rational thought are being compromised. So real spiritual practice is not a running away from the world. It's equipping yourself with very, very powerful tools of discerning reality from illusion, so that when you respond to events in the world, you do so from some other place than just a knee-jerk emotional reaction. So vote yoga in 2016.
Oh, yoga, I like that. And by the way, I hate to cherry pick like that, but you did mention that when 9/11 happened and all that, to suspend constitutional rights, same thing Hitler did, then that's like a state crime against democracy. Hey, don't mean to pick on you, man, but make sure you use the proper terminology. Don't say democracy, say republic, because a democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. In a republic, the minority, in this case the sheep, can prevent the tyrannical wolves from inflicting tyranny upon them. So I know it may seem like much, but I got to make us think about it, because I know the mainstream media always use democracy, and so do all those radical leftists, those brainwashed leftists who don't know what they're talking about.
Point well made, Andrew. I accept your point. It's a very, very good one. Language is critical, and I stand corrected. We have to be very cautious about how we use words. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And just a quick time check here. 13 minutes and 45 seconds left on the live feed. If you have to go past 8 o'clock p.m. to finish a thought or something, that's all right. We can do that. I just don't want to go too far past that. I want to try to keep the show to 2 hours. If anybody wants, if we have to go past 8 o'clock, people would have to call in to listen. Call in number 646-478-4747. But try to keep it to end at 8 o'clock. And then the last thing worth talk about the Bhagavad Gita. You wrote a book, Gita Wisdom, an introduction to India's essential yoga text. I did talk a lot about this with Michael Cremo when I had him as a guest on my show. And one of the more notable things about the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic text, for that matter, talk about how human history goes back millions upon millions of years, like people who follow the work of Zecharia Sitchin might say that humanity was created when the Anunnaki genetically engineered humans about 300,000 years ago by combining Homo erectus DNA with Anunnaki DNA. But many people would assert, no. It goes millions of years before then. Time is cyclical. Cycles of time throughout happen. We're infinite consciousness. There was no big bang. Everything had to go from an infinite starting point and all that. And, there could have been many different events throughout the infinite course of time that what Zecharia Sitchin talked about, and for that matter, what you see in the Vedic text and the Bhagavad Gita and all the other texts that would say that humanity goes back millions of years. So this idea that humanity really does go back before Atlantis, before Lemuria. Some people said there's actually been many different Atlantises and Lemurias. Andrew Bartzis has talked about the second and third fall of Atlantis and Lemuria, that there were ones before the ones that we currently associate with 13,000 years ago and before then. And Lemuria, the most recent Lemuria, they say Cape was 900,000 years ago or something, but there was a one before then, if you believe the Vedic text would say humanity goes back millions of years. So this subject that humanity goes back millions of years and how the Vedic texts talk about it, any comments, statements, or anything like that?
No, it's a fascinating area of research. One of the things that really captured my imagination as a young man when I first got involved with Prabhupada and his teachings, and I touch on this in Swami in a Strange Land, is the notion that history is much older than we generally credit it with being. There's both cyclical time and linear time. The Vedic description is that we are linear in the sense that 4 ages appear one after the other, starting with a golden age, and then a silver age, a bronze age, and then the current Kali Yuga, or age of confusion and quarrel, and iron age. At the end of this age, the cycle begins again. So it's linear until the cycle recommences. And according to that Vedic calculation, we're at the beginning point of a golden era within Kali Yuga. We're on an upward curve, spiritually speaking, where for about the next 5,000 years, humanity will go through an evolution in spiritual thought. At that point, there'll be a gradual decrease over another 5,000 years, so that by 10,000 years from now, things will have reached a point where no more chanting Hare Krishna. It won't do any good until finally things devolve to such a point that a new age begins again. So there's both cyclical and linear time recognized in the Vedic texts, and the relevancy of that for ourselves is probably a way of coping with the tragedies of our own life, that things were not always this bad in human history. This is Kali Yuga. This is the rotten apple at the bottom of the barrel. There was a time when people were less garrulous, less inclined to fighting and war, where there was a greater awareness of the sacredness of all creation, where life was simpler. It wasn't characterized by machines. And, I'm not a Luddite, don't get me wrong, but I do teach in schools, and I see how addicted young people are to their handheld devices. That was not always true. You don't have to go back that far to a time when storytelling and communing among family and friends was the entertainment. The handheld device was the pot in the kitchen where you'd be helping to cook dinner. So we're not at a particularly healthy or happy time just now. So maybe the relevance of this discussion about the historicity of humanity would be to put our life in some perspective, that there's a more natural, easeful, peaceful way of existing, and it's still available through the yoga culture. So if any of your listeners are thinking about starting yoga or getting involved with some spiritual path, there's a lot of good that can come out of that, even within the Kali Yuga. There are things that you can do to balance your life. Again, just be careful and do your homework and make sure you find out who are the good teachers in your part of the world.
Right, and you mentioned maybe there'll be a time where there won't be a need to do any more Hare Krishna mantras. That reminds me of something that I've been talking about in more recent shows, about how as the Earth's consciousness raises and energy raises, vibrational frequency goes up, we may not need to do a lot of things that some people would go as far as saying are crutches. Like many people associate psychoactive drugs as being a crutch. Others say, well, no, they're only a crutch if you use them recreationally. If you use them for spiritual work, they're not a crutch. But there are some like Stuart Swerdlow. When I had him on my show, he went as far as saying things like crystals and Egyptian healing rods and mantras and all that are crutches. You don't need them, he says, because you're infinite consciousness. You don't even need to ask your guardian angels and spirit guides for help because you're infinite consciousness. You can do it all yourself. And I take issue with that because for the same reason I took issue with some other things I mentioned earlier about how it takes away from the spice of life that is variety. You want to have a little fun? Why don't you incorporate those things in your life? But an unavoidable consequence, many would say, to the fact that Earth's vibrational frequency is rising is that we will discover that we will not need to chant mantras, use crystals, and ask our angels and guides for assistance. So do you think that will happen? People will discover there is no need to rely on those crutches, for lack of a better word, in the near future as Earth's vibrational frequency rises?
I don't totally agree. No, first of all, let me correct what might have been a misimpression, and I apologize for that. What I was trying to say is that as Kali Yuga devolves and digresses and deteriorates more and more, there will come a time where people will become so inhuman that they will have lost all interest in spiritual life and live just for the most base of instincts. That's different than saying we won't need chanting anymore. The chanting is an expression of love. I'm not a crystal expert. I'm not, a healing bowls expert. I can't talk to those forms of practices. But specifically when it comes to the chanting of sacred mantras, that's an expression of love. That's like a song of love. That's not a crutch. That's an expression of a feeling in the heart. So there's a difference. There are people I've known who have attempted to use mantras as a crutch, who will do hurtful things and then, chant their Hail Marys or their Hare Krishna as a way of, purging themselves of that activity, and then they go back to doing it again. Then, yes, that's a material interpretation and a crutch and dangerous. But the proper chanting of specifically the Krishna mantra is an expression of love from the heart to God and through God to all living beings. So that's different. That's not a crutch. That's even in the eternal realm, that kind of expression of love goes on. I mean, there's descriptions of what happens if you perfect your spiritual practice. Your soul leaves the body. You're a disembodied being now. You've achieved full self-awareness. Well, where do you go and what do you do? According to the Sanskrit texts, you enter an eternal realm where there's activity. Things go on there. The soul is not some amorphous beam of light that doesn't have any substance to it. That's a misunderstanding. Read Swami in a Strange Land. Prabhupada insisted on this point, that people have a misunderstanding that to be a soul means that you're some kind of disembodied, impersonal energy that just merges with the totality of creation. That's wrong. You are of the same nature as the energy of creation, but you are an individual being, not just now inside this body, but always, eternally. And the nature of being an individual in that liberated state is to exchange love with the Supreme Being and all beings. So that's different. In that state, mantras become one of many different expressions of love. Giving gifts, giving food, receiving food, inviting someone to your place, going to their, all the different expressions of friendship that we know here take place in that eternal realm, but without the material taint of selfish interest. So we have to make a distinction there.
And I'm very, very glad that you did make that distinction. Okay, there's 2 minutes, 15 seconds on the live feed, so I guess I will bring this show to a close, and I'll do that by telling you the same thing I tell all my guests. This is always the most emotional part of every show for me, but I love this interview. I will make sure this interview gets spread far and wide. I'll upload it to YouTube and all that to make sure that your name becomes more of a household name and people will buy your books more, I assure, after they listen to this and get to know you better, you learn your wisdom and all. And it was great having you on. And I suppose if you ever need to get the word out about something, if you ever find something, write a book and want to do like a half hour, an hour special, give me a buzz, and I suppose I could give you a chance to come on my show again. But to tell you the truth, as far as me contacting you or any of my other previous guests goes, ever since I started doing this show from day one, I've always felt an obligation to try to get as many different guests on my show as I can before I give any one specific guest double dips, because I felt that was always the fairest, most impartial, and most importantly, the most informative way of doing a radio show that seeks to expose the true and false nature of reality. So that does mean I probably won't ask you or any of my other guests, previous guests, to come on my show again, but please understand that's only because I need to give thousands of other fascinating individuals like you a chance to have some glory on my show. But I will make sure that this interview that we did gets spread far and wide. Lots of people will hear it. Lots of people will see it. After I upload it to YouTube, I'll get it on some social media networks, provide links to it. And I wish you the best of luck. This was very enlightening. I learned a few things myself. And bless you. May Krishna and infinite consciousness be with you.
Thank you, Andrew. The same to you.
Same to you. Take care now.
Bye.
Later. Bye. All right, folks, that is the end of this show. Next week, I am supposed to have Matthew Bueno. I say supposed to because it seems like he never can come on my show when I ask him, but hopefully this time will be different. He's a very knowledgeable guy. Love to have him on. I'm going to be patient with him till this horse falls down the edge. Matthew Bueno, next week on the 13th of July. This is Andrew Fisher signing off from Nature of Reality Radio. Namaste, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your trek on Infinite Consciousness.